started, as these things often do, over dinner. My parents' dining table cramped with too many plates and too little grace. The kind of evening where the roast is dry, the wine flows too easily, and the air feels like it's holding its breath waiting for someone to say the wrong thing. And when it finally happened, when the sentence dropped into the room like cutlery off the edge of a crowded plate, I almost didn't react. Not because I didn't hear it, but because I couldn't believe they'd actually said it aloud. "We've decided," my mother said, cutting her chicken like it had personally offended her, "that it would be best if Carolyn moved into your apartment next month." Just like that. No preamble, no question, just a decree dropped like a napkin beside my untouched potatoes. I blinked. Once. Twice. My fork hovered in midair halfway to my mouth because surely I'd misheard her. But then Caroline gave that tight, smug smile she always wore when she got what she wanted, the one she used to flash at teachers and boyfriends and bored waiters. Lips pressed together, eyes low-lidded, like the outcome was inevitable, and she'd been waiting for the rest of us to catch up. "Mom," I said slowly, turning toward her with all the calm I could fake, "what do you mean, move into my apartment?" "It makes sense," she replied, as if logistics were love. "Caroline's lease is ending. Your place is larger. It's close to her new internship." "It's my home," I said flatly. "My space." My father spoke next, a voice so familiar in its absence of empathy it might as well have been wallpaper. "Don't be dramatic, Lily. She's your sister. Families help each other." "You didn't even ask me," I said. "You just made a decision about my life and expected me to nod." "We didn't think you'd mind," Caroline chimed in, her tone syrupy and condescending in equal parts. "You live alone. You always say how quiet it is." "I like the quiet," I said. "That's the point." "She'll be out during the day," Mom added, "and Caroline's very neat." I nearly laughed. The girl who once left hair dye on my duvet and used my toothbrush in high school because hers was too far in the cabinet? My sister didn't do boundaries, she did entitlement, and she wore it like perfume. "I have a roommate," I said suddenly, lying so easily it startled me. "You never said anything," Mom replied. "It's new," I said, "temporary." "What's their name?" Caroline asked too quickly. "Vivian," I said. "She's a grad student, and she just signed a lease." It was all fiction, of course. I lived alone, by choice, by design, by necessity. My apartment was the one place I could breathe, where no one filled the silence with judgment or passive-aggressive questions or the exhausting ache of being compared to someone who always took up more space than she earned. "You should have told us," Dad said. "We could have coordinated." "Maybe that's the problem," I said, more to myself than to them. "You're always coordinating around Caroline." A heavy pause followed, one of those dense, airless silences where you can feel everyone in the room recalculating how they see you. And then Mom did what she always did when things didn't go her way. She turned to guilt. "We just thought, after everything we've done for you, you could show a little generosity." "I pay my own rent," I said. "I've paid my way since college." "You've always been so independent," she said, as if it were a flaw. "You never needed us. Caroline does." That was the moment it clicked. Not the words, but the subtext. Caroline needed help, so they would sacrifice whatever was necessary to keep her afloat. Even if it meant cutting into the only sanctuary I'd ever built for myself. I wasn't their child. I was their contingency plan. "She can figure it out," I said quietly, like I did. "Lily," Dad warned, "don't be ungrateful." I pushed back my chair, the legs scraped against the tile like a scream. "You made a decision without me," I said, "so now I'll make one without you." "Don't be ridiculous," Mom snapped. "It's already decided." "Not by me," I said, "and that matters." I left my plate untouched, walked out into the night air that felt too warm for December. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even go straight home. I sat on a park bench 2 blocks from their house, hands in my lap, letting the anger melt into something quieter. Resolve. And then I made a decision. If they wanted Caroline in my apartment, fine, I'd open the door. But I'd decide who was standing behind it. Not them, not her, me. I didn't go home that night, not right away. Instead, I walked through the city with no real destination, the way you do when you're trying to outrun something that already lives inside you, And with each step I took past blinking storefronts and honking taxis and couples laughing like nothing had ever gone wrong in their lives, I felt the tight coil in my chest start to unspool, not because I was healing, but because I was making room for rage, for clarity, for the decision I already knew I was going to make. I thought about all the times they'd chosen Caroline over me, like the time she crashed my car and they blamed me for not locking it, or the time she forgot my birthday but still got the bigger gift that Christmas, because she'd had a hard semester, or how, even now, they spoke about her with soft disappointment and about me with quiet expectation, like her failures were accidental but mine were ungrateful. The pattern was clear. Caroline broke things and I was supposed to fix them. Caroline needed and I was expected to give. But this time they'd miscalculated. Because my apartment wasn't a spare room, it wasn't a favor, it was a boundary, and I was done letting them redraw it. By the time I reached my block, the decision was no longer a theory, it was action. I climbed the stairs to my third-floor walk-up, keys already in hand, my pulse steady in a way that felt new, like I'd finally remembered who I was before they tried to assign me a role I never auditioned for. The apartment greeted me with the smell of old wood and chamomile, the windows cracked just enough to let in the street noise that used to annoy me but now felt grounding. I stood in the entryway, staring at the lock. The place was mine. Every inch of it. And if they thought they could just assign it to someone else like I was a footnote in my own life story, then they were about to learn what it meant to be edited out. The next morning, I drafted a lease. A fake one, but it looked official, formatted in Google Docs with all the legal buzzwords and subclauses that sounded legitimate. Name on the lease, Vivian Reyes, term, 6 months. I even added a small blurb about limited guest access and quiet hours, because if I was going to lie, it might as well be convincing. Then I printed it, signed both lines, and pinned it to the fridge like a talisman. The rest of the day, I crafted the rest of the illusion. 2 coffee mugs in the sink, a second toothbrush, a scarf on the coat rack that didn't belong to me. I told no one, not Sarah, not my coworkers, not even my landlord, who wouldn't care as long as the rent cleared. Then I waited. The next call came 4 days later. Mom, again. Caroline's moving day is set for the 15th, she said briskly, like we were discussing a shipment of patio furniture. She can't, I said. She already booked the U-Haul, she replied, as if logistics trumped consent. She won't get through the door, I said. She has a key. No, I said, she has a copy of the key. And I've changed the locks. A beat of silence followed, long enough for me to imagine her face twisting into that familiar look of disbelief and wounded pride. You're being cruel, she said finally. No, I said. I'm being clear. You're punishing your sister for needing help. I'm protecting my peace from being treated like a family asset. I can't believe this, she said, her voice rising. That's the problem, I said. You never could, she hung up. I didn't feel victorious, but I did feel unburdened. That night, I made a pot of pasta, poured a glass of wine, and watched reruns of a sitcom that had nothing to do with family or obligation or the ache of being underestimated. I was halfway through the second episode when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Caroline. Hey, she wrote. Mom said you're being weird about the apartment. Let's talk. I didn't reply. She followed up. Are you really going to leave your own sister stranded over some petty boundary? Still, I said nothing, because the truth was, I didn't owe her an explanation. She had always assumed access to my space, to my silence, to the effort I poured into keeping everything from falling apart. But not this time. This time, she would arrive. With her suitcase, her certainty, her entitlement, and she would find a door she couldn't open. And someone else standing behind it, because I had made a plan, and it started with a knock. Caroline showed up at 9:14 IMP on a Saturday with 2 suitcases, a box of plants, and a latte in her hand like she was checking into a hotel, not crashing someone else's life without consent. And I watched it all unfold from 3 blocks away, sitting in a bakery window with a direct view of my own front steps. Croissant untouched, coffee gone cold, heart steady, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I had rehearsed this moment too many times to flinch now. She rang the buzzer once, then again, the impatience already bubbling in her jawline, and when no one answered, she pulled out her phone, typed furiously, and waited, head tilted with that familiar mix of disbelief and offense. the expression of someone who had never been denied access, who had always been let in, even when the space didn't belong to her. I didn't answer the call. I didn't even blink. Instead, I finished my pastry, threw away the cup, and waited for part 2. 5 minutes later, she pulled out the copy of the key my parents had made years ago, back when I first moved out and they insisted on having emergency access, even though the only emergency they ever used it for was to drop off unsolicited casseroles and lecture me about my bare walls. She tried the lock, it didn't fit. She tried again, and I saw it. First the confusion, then the panic, then the dawning horror that something about this wasn't going according to her script. She pulled her phone again. Another call, another voicemail. Then she sat on the top step, legs crossed, typing angrily. This time, it was Mom. 10 minutes later, my mother called me 4 times. Then she texted, "Why did you change the locks?" Then, "Caroline is outside, let her in." Then, "This is unacceptable. She's family." I silenced the phone, stood, and walked out of the cafe with the slow confidence of someone who'd finally decided not to explain herself to people who never listened. I didn't go home, not yet, because home was mine and I was no longer going to let guilt drag me back to the front door like a scolded child. Instead, I walked around the block, through the park, back to the place where I'd bought the fake lease forms and a welcome mat that read, "No soliciting, no drama." My apartment had never looked so perfect. Inside, it smelled like eucalyptus and fresh paint. The framed lease sat where it always had, on the fridge right above the little note that read, "Please respect the space. Quiet hours 9 p.m., 7 a.m." And then, at exactly 10:06 a.m., the buzzer rang again. I waited, counted 5 slow seconds, then pressed the intercom. "Who is it?" "It's Caroline," she said, voice already fraying. "Lily, let me in. This is ridiculous." "There's a tenant," I said. "What?" "There's a tenant. She's on the lease." "You're not." A beat, then her voice, higher pitched, more brittle. "You're lying." "I'm not." "You made that up. Prove it," I said. "This is my house," she snapped. "No," I replied. "It's mine." And then I hung up. 30 seconds later, she was calling again. Then Mom, then Dad, then a flood of messages from extended family, some version of, "What's going on?" and "You're blowing this out of proportion," and "Just open the door." But I didn't. Because here's the thing no one tells you about boundaries. When you first build them, people treat them like barricades, as if you're the one starting a war, when really, you're just ending one they refused to acknowledge for years. By noon, Caroline had given up. She left the bags on the curb, took the plants, got into an Uber. I watched it all through the security camera I'd installed last week, just in case. And when the screen went dark, I sat on my couch and finally exhaled. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. The next morning, my mother showed up, unannounced, holding a casserole dish like it was an olive branch and not an excuse. I didn't open the door. She stood there for 10 minutes, knocking, calling my name, saying, "I just want to talk," like that phrase had ever meant anything other than, "I want to make you feel guilty." Eventually, she left the dish on the doormat and walked away. I opened the door, picked it up, and threw it out. Later that night, Sarah came over. I told her everything. She laughed so hard she spilled wine on the rug. "You're the villain in their story now," she said. "I know. Feels good though, right?" I looked at the clean floors, the quiet space, the soft hum of a life I chose. It feels honest. The texts didn't stop. Mom tried pleading, Dad tried reasoning, Caroline tried rage. They all danced through their assigned roles, trying every emotional key on the ring, but none of them opened the door. A week passed, then 2, and then silence. Blessed, golden, uninterrupted silence. And in that silence, something bloomed. Not revenge, not gloating, but relief, because for the first time in years, I didn't wake up dreading what version of me they'd try to reshape. I woke up to my own breath, my own pace, my own name, spoken only by people who meant it. And as I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the wind scatter last year's leaves, I realized something else. They thought they were entitled to my space, but they forgot I'd built it from scratch, and no one, not even blood, gets to walk into a place like that without being invited. It was a rainy Wednesday when the second knock came. Not the usual buzz of the intercom or the metallic rattle of a forgotten delivery, but an actual knock, deliberate and slow, the kind of knock that assumes someone owes you something on the other side of the door. And I knew even before I looked through the peephole that it would be her, standing there with that same self-righteous stance she always wore when she thought persistence could be mistaken for grace. But this time, she wasn't alone. Caroline stood on my doormat with a man I'd never seen before. Tall, lean, the kind of forgettable handsome that screams real estate agent or tech startup mid-manager. Someone who looked like he'd been promised something, and from the way he glanced up at the building and then back at her, it was clear that promise included my apartment. I didn't open the door. Instead, I watched from the kitchen window, heart steady, kettle hissing, while she gestured toward the windows like she was giving him a tour of something that belonged to her. Something she had the right to offer, to explain, to sell. It was astonishing, really, the audacity. Not just the showing up, but the performance. The way she stood there with such confidence, as though I hadn't made myself clear 100 times before, as though my refusal had been a misunderstanding she could simply charm away. I watched as she casually pulled a key from her coat pocket and tried the lock, a motion so smooth it almost seemed rehearsed. But even she couldn't ignore the telltale click that followed. Her key, the one that used to open the door, didn't work anymore. She paused as if in disbelief, then tried again, more forcefully this time. Still nothing. She smiled awkwardly, clearly caught off guard by the failure, and I saw the way she turned to the man beside her, likely offering some excuse, some explanation for the situation. He shrugged and laughed, his tone light, the kind of humor that deflects discomfort, as though it were all part of a joke. Probably something about maintenance or security or my sister's weird rules. She turned back to the door, scanning the surrounding area, and I could feel her frustration mounting. And then, without missing a beat, she did what she always did. She smiled again, but this time it was different. It was brittle, forced. The kind of smile you put on when you're trying to convince yourself that the world still bends to your will. Then, in one smooth motion, she reached into her pocket again and pulled out the same key, the one that didn't fit, but she kept trying it. The key that had once opened every door between us, every possibility, now was nothing more than a symbol of her denial, of her insistence that the boundaries I'd tried to set were inconsequential. Still, nothing. The lock remained stubborn, as if mocking her persistence. She muttered something under her breath, probably a curse or a passive-aggressive jab at me for the inconvenience. She turned to the man, who shrugged again, clearly embarrassed now, but not willing to get involved any further. He stepped back, looking up at the rain-soaked awning above them, his hands lifted in a universal gesture of, "What am I supposed to do here?" He said something. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but his tone was final, dismissive almost, like he was done. He wasn't interested in being part of this scene, and why should he be? A potential roommate? Was that really the line she'd chosen this time? To try to rent out my apartment, without so much as a conversation, without even a word to me before showing up unannounced, dragging some stranger into the mess? It was surreal watching them stand there together, drenched in the rain, both pretending like none of this was a violation, like none of this was a farce. Like her standing there with her old key was just a minor hiccup, nothing to be taken seriously, but there was something that shifted in me as I stood there watching. I realized that I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to get, frustrated and exhausted by her entitled behavior. I felt almost calm. It was an unsettling sort of peace, the kind that only comes from knowing exactly what you need to do next, the kind of peace that comes from no longer caring whether she understood your side or not. My phone buzzed then, the familiar screen lit up with her name. "I have a potential roommate with me. Can you come down?" She was still trying. Still, after everything, thinking I would walk out and solve her problems for her. Then the next text. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." And then, in rapid succession, "I already told him it's fine." Fine. Her word again. The one that never meant what it seemed. Fine right before she borrowed my sweaters without asking. Fine before she crashed on my couch, expecting me to feed her while she sorted out yet another mess she'd created. Fine when she took my space, my time, my silence, and twisted them into signs of agreement. This time, I didn't text back. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. or argue, or get dragged back into her spiral of guilt and manipulation. Instead, I walked over to my desk, pulled out the envelope I had prepared 2 weeks ago, the one that I'd hoped I would never have to use, and slid the folded paper under the door. I didn't need to say anything. The words spoke for themselves. This residence is currently occupied by a legal tenant. Any further attempts at unauthorized entry will be reported. Simple, direct, no room for misinterpretation. I watched her bend down to read it. Her eyes narrowed as they scanned the text, the sharpness in her expression growing. She was furious, but this time she couldn't twist my actions into something that blamed me. She said something to the man standing beside her, probably an angry retort, something defensive. But he didn't react the way she wanted. He just glanced at the door, at the lock, then back at her. It was clear he wasn't interested in being caught in the middle of whatever domestic drama this was. He stepped back, slowly, his hands raised in surrender. I could almost hear his thoughts. Not my problem. And then, with one final look at Caroline, he turned and walked away. Just like that, Caroline stood there for a moment longer, frozen, as if waiting for something to change, as if the universe would finally bend to her will. But nothing happened. She kicked the paper I'd slipped under the door, her boot connecting with it in a sharp, angry motion. It fluttered against the doorframe, falling limply to the floor, a useless scrap of paper now. I didn't move. I waited. I wanted to make sure that she knew this time I wasn't backing down. I waited until I heard the sound of her wet shoes stomping down the stairs, the echo of the front door slamming shut behind her, and then, only then, did I let myself breathe again. Not because I was afraid. No, I wasn't afraid. But because holding a boundary takes energy. It takes everything you have to stand firm when the people you care about expect you to fold, to bend, to make excuses, even when it's necessary. Especially when it's against someone you've been told time and time again you're supposed to love. That night, the messages came fast. Mom first. What on earth happened? Then Dad. He was just trying to help her settle in. And then Caroline. You embarrassed me. Then he backed out. Then, are you proud of yourself? The flood of texts, each one like a jab, each one accusing me of the same thing. Being stubborn, being difficult, being the one who wouldn't just let it go. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to explain myself anymore, because pride wasn't the point. Peace was. Control was. Clarity was. And I wasn't going to break that clarity for someone who thought my autonomy was a temporary inconvenience. The next morning, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I changed the security code for the building. I updated the lock again, this time with a better one. I even installed a second camera, one with sound, because I wasn't about to leave myself vulnerable. Not again. Later that evening, Sarah came over. I told her the whole story. She whistled long and low. She really tried to rent it out, she said. I nodded. To a stranger? She called him a potential roommate. Sarah stared at me for a moment, considering, then shook her head. You need to write a book. We laughed until we cried. And then we made dinner, barefoot, the apartment filled with the scent of garlic and music, and the kind of quiet joy that doesn't need anyone else's permission to exist. It was the kind of happiness that comes from finally stepping into your own life and leaving behind the noise of other people's expectations. In that moment, I realized something profound. My life had become something rare, not just because of the locks, or the lease, or the lines I'd finally drawn, but because I had stopped waiting for people to honor me in ways they'd already proven they never would. I was no longer trying to be understood, I was simply being, and if that meant being the villain in someone else's story, so be it, because in mine, I was the one finally coming home. It was 2 weeks of silence before I heard from them again. 14 whole days without a knock, without a voicemail, without an apology masquerading as an accusation, and for a while, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. That Caroline had given up the fight. That my parents had retreated into whatever version of reality allowed them to justify giving one daughter everything and expecting the other to clean up after it. But deep down, because people like them don't back down, they regroup. And when the message finally came, it wasn't a call, it wasn't even a text. It was a certified letter delivered to my building's mailroom, addressed in my father's handwriting, the kind he only used when trying to sound professional, like business could somehow cover up the personal rot underneath. I brought the envelope upstairs, sliced it open with a butter knife, and pulled out 2 sheets of neatly folded printer paper. The top one reading, "To whom it may concern, this letter serves as formal notice that we, John and Marlene Evans, legal guardians of Caroline Evans, request accommodation be made for temporary housing at the property currently occupied by Lily Evans." I stopped reading right there, because I could already taste the entitlement in every line, the legal theater, the audacity of treating me like a property manager instead of their daughter, like the issue wasn't their behavior but my refusal to continue being complicit in it. I set the letter down, didn't rip it, didn't burn it, just read it once, then twice, and then opened my laptop. I typed a response. Not a legal reply, not a rebuttal, just a message, 3 sentences. To my mother's email, "Received your letter. The answer is no. Stop contacting me unless it's to apologize." I didn't expect a reply, but I got one anyway. Less than an hour later. From her, subject line cold, message body. "You're being unnecessarily cruel. Your sister is family. We didn't raise you to act like this." I stared at the screen for a long time and then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so wildly predictable, so perfectly in line with their narrative that any resistance from me had to be framed as cruelty, that holding a line was betrayal, that being firm meant I'd become some stranger they didn't recognize. But I wasn't a stranger. I was the same girl who once cleaned up after Caroline's parties in high school so she wouldn't get grounded. The same girl who gave up her college visit to stay home and watch our aging dog when Caroline had a volleyball tournament. The same girl who left her own apartment during the pandemic so Caroline could quarantine in comfort after her second breakup in a year. And now, because I wouldn't hand over the last space that still felt like mine, I was cold. The irony was exhausting. So I went for a walk. Down to the bookstore on Franklin Avenue, the one with the mismatched chairs and the sleepy cat named Orbit that always slept on the poetry shelf. I bought a book I didn't need, sat in the corner with a cup of oversteeped tea, let myself read until the knot in my chest started to loosen. And when I walked home, I passed a flyer taped to a telephone pole. It read, "No is a full sentence." I took a picture of it, made it my phone background. 2 days later, Sarah called. "You okay?" she asked. They sent a formal letter. Oh God, like legally? Like passive-aggressive legally. Jesus. "I think they want me to crack." "You're not going to, though." "No," I said, "I'm not. Because the thing about family is, when you stop playing the role they wrote for you, they'll do everything they can to shove you back into it. Guilt you, gaslight you, love bomb you. And when that doesn't work, they'll weaponize the narrative. She's changed. She's cold. She's ungrateful." But the truth is, I hadn't changed. I'd just stopped performing. Stopped apologizing, stopped handing over parts of myself for people who never once said thank you. By the weekend, I'd blocked their emails, all of them. Set a filter so anything with Caroline in the subject line went straight to trash. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited my coworkers over, just a handful, people I actually liked. We cooked, played cards, talked about stupid things like reality TV and TikTok algorithms, and the one coworker who always used Comic Sans in emails, and not once did I think about Caroline, or the apartment, or the letter, or the girl they kept insisting I should still be. After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, music playing low, windows cracked to let the city hum inside, and I realized something else I hadn't fully put words to yet. I wasn't rebuilding from their rubble. I was building something entirely new, with my hands, my voice, my rules. And for the first time in my life, the silence around me didn't feel like exile. It felt like arrival. It was a Thursday afternoon when the knock came. Not urgent, not aggressive, just firm, deliberate, 3 taps spaced evenly, like someone who had every right to be there and no reason to doubt he'd be let in. And I froze. Tea in one hand, laptop balanced on my knee, because no one knocked anymore. Not after everything, not without calling first. And this time, there had been no buzz, no warning, no missed calls from my parents or texts from Caroline. Just this quiet, confident knock echoing through the hall like a challenge. I stood slowly, placed the mug on the windowsill, patted across the hardwood floor, and looked through the peephole. He was young, mid-20s maybe, dark hoodie, neatly trimmed beard, holding a leather folder and a set of keys. Keys. Or at least, the ones that used to fit before I'd changed the locks. I didn't open the door. I never open the door without context anymore. "Can I help you?" I called through the door, voice steady, but low. "Yeah," he said, casual like we'd spoken before. "I'm here about the sublet. Caroline told me to stop by." Sublet. The word hit like a slap. I took a breath, deep and slow. "Sublet?" I said. "This unit isn't available." "That's not what she said," he replied. "She gave me the address, told me to swing by and see the place, said you'd be expecting me." I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course she did. She couldn't get in herself, so she decided to get creative. Send someone else, a third party with charm and plausible deniability, someone who wouldn't look like a threat but would still be there to intrude, to claim, to chip away at the boundary I'd already made so clear. "What's your name?" I asked. "Ethan." "Ethan, you were misinformed. This apartment is not available. No sublet exists. Caroline doesn't live here, and she doesn't have the authority to show or offer this space to anyone." There was a pause, a long one. I imagined him looking at the folder in his hand, maybe pulling out some printout she'd made, photoshopped lease agreement, screenshots of fake email threads, maybe even forged documentation if she was feeling particularly bold. "Look," he said, shifting into that mild frustration men often carry when they realize they've been sent into a situation more complicated than they were promised. "I'm not trying to start anything. I was told to come here. I just moved into town." "She said it was all lined up." "She lied," I said. "Leave." "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear." "She said you'd be fine with it." "I'm not." "You need to go." And to his credit, he did. He left without argument, without protest, without lingering in the hall like some have. Just turned, folder under one arm, muttered sorry as he went. I listened to his footsteps fade down the stairs before locking the second bolt, pulling down the privacy shade, and walking back to the living room with hands that had started to shake. Not from fear, but fury. She had sent someone, a stranger, into my space, into my home. And if he'd been anyone else, if I hadn't changed the locks, if I hadn't installed cameras or kept receipts or decided long ago to stop giving her the benefit of the doubt, I might have been blindsided, or worse, replaced in my own life by someone she deemed more worthy, more convenient, more compliant. That was her version of compromise. Send someone polite, someone smiling, someone bearing paper instead of force, and hope I'd fold like I used to. But I didn't fold. I called Sarah. "Tell me I'm not crazy," I said. "Again?" she asked. "Sent a guy. Said she told him to check out the sublet." "My God, what did you do?" "Told him to leave. Locked the door. Now I'm pacing. You want me to come over?" "No, I want her to stop. I want them all to stop acting like I'm a malfunction instead of a boundary." Sarah exhaled into the phone. "She's escalating. That means your silence is working." "Feels more like it's baiting." "Same thing sometimes. You holding the line?" "With both hands." "Then keep holding it." I hung up and pulled out my laptop, opened a document I'd started months ago and hadn't looked at since. My will. My emergency contacts. My living trust. I added a clause. In the event of death or incapacitation, the tenant wishes to designate no family member as successor occupant without explicit, notarized consent. Not because I expected to need it, but because I needed the paper trail. The wall, the legal echo of my no. That weekend, I filed a police report, not for action, just documentation. Just in case she tried again. I added the footage from the hallway camera, the voice recording, the message logs, the letter from my parents. I gave them names, dates, photos, because clarity matters. Especially when you're dealing with people who twist stories into safety nets they can fall back on when the truth gets inconvenient. I'd told the officer, "She's my sister." He nodded. "That's usually how these things start." And later that night, I sat in my living room, lights low, window cracked, the city breathing around me, and I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit until now. This wasn't just about the apartment. It never had been. This was about what happened when a family stops seeing you as a person and starts treating you like a resource. Your space, your time, your silence, your forgiveness, all assumed, all expected, all taken. And when you finally say no, they don't hear it as a sentence. They hear it as a betrayal. But the truth is, saying no is how we survive, how we reclaim, how we stay whole. And if she sent another stranger, if she knocked again, if she called, if she cried or begged or threatened or rewrote the story, I'd still say no, not because I'm cruel, but because I finally believe I deserve a life that isn't borrowed. The message that finally broke the calm didn't come from Caroline or from my parents. It came from Aunt Lena, the family's unofficial historian, mediator, and messenger, the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, sent handwritten Christmas cards, and somehow always knew when the storm was brewing, even before it reached landfall. And her voice on the phone that Sunday morning was gentle, almost too gentle, the way someone speaks when they're about to say something sharp and they're hoping you'll mistake it for kindness. And I knew, before she even said the first sentence, that this wasn't going to be a check-in, it was going to be an intervention. "Sweetheart," she began, "I just wanted to call and make sure you're doing okay. Everyone's been so worried." That word, everyone, sounded like a net, the kind that tightens when you try to wiggle free. "I'm fine," I said. "Really?" She paused, and I could hear her flipping pages, maybe notes, maybe printed out emails from my mother, the kind of organized guilt-tripping that only comes from decades of family dinners and unspoken feuds. "You know," she said carefully, "your parents are just trying to help. They love both of you girls so much." I leaned against the counter, staring at the plant on my windowsill that I hadn't watered in days, the one Caroline once knocked over and never cleaned up. "I know what they call it," I said, "but it doesn't feel like love. It feels like expectation." "Lily," she said, and I could hear the gears turning, trying to shift the blame gently. "They're not perfect. None of us are. But they're your family." I closed my eyes. "I never said they weren't. I said, they're crossing a line." "Because they wanted Caroline to stay with you?" she asked, as if the entire situation was as simple as a sleepover gone wrong. "Because they assumed they could decide that for me," I replied. "Because when I said no, they kept pushing. Because when I held a boundary, they called it cruelty. Because they didn't ask, they assigned." There was a pause, the kind that stretches too long and tells you someone is deciding whether to keep the peace or tell the truth. She chose the former. "I just don't want you to regret cutting them out." "I didn't cut them out," I said, quiet but firm. "I closed a door. There's a difference." "They're saying you've changed," she offered, like a breadcrumb meant to lure me back. "I have," I said. "And they don't like that the version of me they can't control is the one who's finally at peace." I thanked her for calling, told her I had to go. And I did. Straight into the thick of a to-do list I hadn't touched in days. Because when you're trying to maintain your life and defend your home at the same time, something always gives. And lately it had been the basics. Laundry, groceries, breathing. I spent the next few hours reclaiming the mundane. Folded clothes, cleaned the baseboards, went to the store and bought fresh oranges because they reminded me that some things can stay whole if you treat them gently. I walked home with a tote bag full of little proofs of care. Lavender soap, a new sponge, dark chocolate, and told myself out loud, "You're allowed to choose this." But when I got back, I saw it on the door, a note. Not taped, but pinned, like something a passive-aggressive neighbor would leave when your trash cans are crooked. My name scrawled across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, my sister's. I peeled it off the wood and read it once, standing in the hall, groceries hanging from my arms. "Lily, you've made your point. I don't want to fight. Can we just talk? I'll be back tomorrow at 6. No apology, no acknowledgement, just another expectation, another knock, pre-scheduled without consent. I didn't respond. I didn't call. Instead, I took the note inside, laid it on the counter like evidence, and thought, this is what they mean when they say family is forever. They mean the obligation, not the care. The assumption, not the effort. The belief that no matter how badly they behave, you'll always be waiting with an open door and a soft chair. But my door wasn't open, and the only chair waiting had one less seat than they thought. At 5:58 p.m. the next day, I made tea. Not out of panic, not out of preparation, just ritual, calm, intentionality. I sat at the kitchen table, closest to the window, and waited. At 6:02, I heard the knock. Same rhythm as before, same assumption. I stood, walked slowly, and looked through the peephole. Caroline, alone, no suitcase this time. No smile either, just irritation and impatience, poorly disguised. I didn't open the door, I cracked the window instead. Just a few inches, just enough. "I got your note," I said. She looked up, rolled her eyes. "This is getting ridiculous. You're not entitled to my space," I said. "You don't get to keep showing up like this." "I just want to talk," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Then send an email," I said, like a professional, like an adult, not like someone trying to invade a home that doesn't belong to her. "We're sisters," she hissed. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It used to," I said, "but you keep confusing sisterhood with surrender." She stepped back, stunned, maybe because no one had ever said it that plainly. Not to her, not out loud. I waited, let the silence stretch, let the weight of it settle. "I'm not your option," I said. "I'm not your reset button. I'm not your free housing. I'm your sister, and that means I get to say no." She said nothing, just stood there, then turned, walked down the stairs, no goodbye, no theatrics, just retreat. And when she was gone, I closed the window, sat back down, sipped my tea, and let myself feel it, not triumph, not relief, but mourning. Because boundaries aren't just fences. They're funerals for the version of you that kept folding. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is bury her gently and keep the door locked. It started with an invitation that wasn't really an invitation, more like a summons disguised in seasonal language, tucked into an email that began with, "We miss you," and ended with Christmas Eve dinner at 6, same as always, as if nothing had happened, as if the last 6 months hadn't been one long unraveling of everything we pretended was normal. And when I read it, standing barefoot in my kitchen with my morning coffee in hand and a calendar full of peace, I didn't feel guilt. I felt calculation, because I knew exactly what this was, a reset attempt, a reputation salvage, a performance wrapped in pine-scented diplomacy. And I wasn't about to step back into that theater. It was my mother's email, but I could hear my father's edits in the phrasing, too polite to be hers alone, too scripted to be spontaneous. And I could feel Caroline's fingerprints on the subject line, "Let's come together again," like she hadn't just tried to replace me with a stranger and sell off my space like it was a guest room in a hotel she didn't own. I didn't respond at first, not because I was angry, but because I was tired. Tired of being pulled back into their orbit every time the holidays rolled around. Tired of being seen as the difficult one for refusing to play along with a script that only served them. 2 days passed. Then a voicemail. From Dad. His voice carefully neutral, like a news anchor reading an apology someone else wrote. "We'd love to see you. Everyone will be there. It would mean a lot to your mother." That phrase, "it would mean a lot to your mother," was code. It always meant sacrifice something. Your plans, your comfort, your boundary. And so I opened my laptop, not to RSVP, but to write. Not a reply, an invoice. It was half joke, half truth, and every line item was a receipt. Emotional labor from age 12 to 28, $45,000 0 cents. Unpaid tech support for Caroline's failed Etsy business, $1,200 0 cents. Christmas gifts with zero reciprocation, $1,150 0 cents. Apartment harassment, $3,750 0 cents. Therapy sessions post-intervention, $2,600 0 cents. Loss of peace due to repeated doorstep ambushes, $9,000 0 cents. I attached it to the email with a simple note. Before I RSVP, please review the outstanding balance. Then I pressed send and waited. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. This time, it was Caroline. Of course. "Is this a joke?" she snapped. "No," I said. "You're sending invoices now? just trying to match the energy," I said. "You assigned me a roommate. I figured we'd start putting everything on paper. You're being petty." "I'm being clear. This is just you trying to avoid the family." "No," I said. "This is me refusing to be the family's unpaid therapist and housing coordinator." She hung up. Another hour later, my mother replied via email. No greeting. Just, "You've made your point. If you want to come, come. If not, don't bother. We won't beg." And for the first time in my life, I believed her. They weren't going to beg, because begging would mean admitting they'd been wrong, that they'd misused me, that they'd built the whole scaffolding of family on a system where one daughter could break things and the other was supposed to glue them back together, quietly, efficiently, without thanks. I didn't go to Christmas dinner. I didn't call. I didn't text. Instead, I made a lasagna, watched an old movie, read a novel with the windows open and candles lit while the snow fell in slow, lazy spirals past my balcony. And I didn't feel lonely. I felt safe. Still whole. Sarah stopped by around 9, brought pie and wine, and didn't even ask why I wasn't with my family. She already knew. We sat on the floor, eating and laughing, and somewhere in the middle of her telling me about her latest Hinge date disaster, she paused, looked around, and said, "You know what's crazy?" "What?" "This place feels like you. I don't mean decorated by you, I mean built by you." And I looked around. At the bookshelf full of stories I chose, at the couch no one else had claimed, at the walls that had never once heard me apologize for wanting space. And I realized she was right. It was mine. Every inch. Every breath. Every boundary. And maybe they'd never understand that. Maybe they'd spend the rest of their lives thinking I was the one who broke away, the one who changed, the one who stopped trying. But the truth was, I hadn't stopped trying. I had just started trying for the right person. Me. It's strange how endings rarely look the way we expect them to. There's no climactic scene, no final confrontation with raised voices and slammed doors, no sudden epiphany that wraps everything into a bow. There's just this quiet, gradual shift, like a sunrise you didn't notice until the room was already full of light. And for me, that moment came in the form of a letter, not handwritten, not tear-stained, but typed and unsigned, slipped into my mailbox in a plain envelope like junk mail. And when I opened it, I knew immediately it was from my mother, not because she signed it, but because no one else would go to such effort to sound like they weren't trying. The letter was full of almost apologies, things like, "We only did what we thought was best," and "Families make mistakes," and "Maybe we all just need to forgive." But never once did it say, "I'm sorry." Not once did it say, "We were wrong." And I understood in that moment that I was never going to get that kind of closure. Not from them, not from Caroline, not from anyone who believed that love meant compliance and that boundaries were betrayal. And I folded the letter, not out of reverence, but habit. Tucked it into the drawer with the others. Every note, every voicemail transcription, every record of how they tried to stretch my silence into submission. And then I did something I hadn't done since this all began. I booked a one-way ticket. Not to leave forever, just to go. Somewhere quiet, somewhere mine. A cabin in the mountains, no Wi-Fi, just snow and breath and space, because I needed to remember who I was without the echo of their voices bouncing off every wall I tried to build. In the weeks leading up to that trip, Caroline didn't call. My parents didn't write. No one knocked. It was as if they had finally accepted that I wasn't the version of me they'd built their lives around, and for once, I didn't feel like I had lost something. I felt like I had returned to something I'd never been allowed to keep. I left the apartment spotless, watered the plants, set the timers, wrote a note to myself on the fridge. This place was worth protecting, and then I left. The cabin was everything the city wasn't. Still vast, untouched, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. And the first night there, I built a fire with trembling hands, not because I was cold, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could build warmth from scratch. No one called, no one interrupted. The silence was mine, earned. I wrote every morning, walked in the afternoons, cooked with ingredients I actually tasted, read books cover to cover without checking my phone. And slowly, like something thawing, I realized that healing wasn't going to be a moment. It was going to be a rhythm, a new way of moving through the world. The moment I returned to the city, something felt different. It wasn't them, it was me. They still hadn't changed. But I had. Sarah met me at the train station. She hugged me hard and said, "You look like you slept." I did, I told her, and meant it. Back in the apartment, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Keys in the bowl, air faintly lavender, the fridge humming like a heartbeat, and I stood in the doorway for a long time, realizing that this wasn't just a home, it was a line in the sand. It was a declaration, not to them, to myself. That I mattered, that I wasn't selfish for protecting peace, that I didn't have to audition for love anymore. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. This one was shorter. From Caroline, no apology, just, "If you're done being angry, I'd like to talk." I folded it once and slid it into the drawer, right next to the others, and then I locked it. Because sometimes moving on doesn't mean burning bridges. It just means refusing to walk across them again. It means letting them stay on the other side while you build a house that doesn't need their approval. I started hosting friends more often, cooked loud dinners with too much garlic, laughed until my ribs ached, let the walls echo with music that was mine. Not once did I miss the tension of those family dinners. Not once did I wonder if I'd done the right thing, because every day that I didn't have to explain myself was proof that I had. Sometimes the greatest act of rebellion isn't slamming a door, it's locking it gently, hanging a sign that says, "Not for you," and walking into a life that fits you like a key you made by hand. And if you've ever been told you owe them more just because they share your name, let me be the one to say, you don't. You owe them nothing they refused to give you first. You owe yourself everything they convinced you was too much to ask for. I didn't slam the door on my family, but I stopped holding it open, and that has made all the difference.